Hello and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Oulette Stonechild, and I'm super excited today. Today, we are joined by the Honourable Mandy Gull-Masty, Canada's first Indigenous Minister of Indigenous Services. She's also a new member of Parliament, and she has been leading Indigenous leadership throughout her whole life. I have learned about her through her advocacy when it comes to community-led governance, when it comes to environmental stewardship, and the future of Indigenous services in Canada. Thank you so much, Minister, for being here. If you just want to introduce yourself to the audience and where you come from, and also maybe a little bit about your new role.
Thank you. Waja Sheila, Chinaskum Najibajwishamin Jajibaj Yimhidan. Hi, my name is Mandy Gull-Masty. Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me be part of this discussion. I am from EUSG. I'm James Bay Cree in the north part of the province. I'm from the Cree First Nation of Waswanipi. I am a new member in Parliament. My riding is Abitibi Bay James Nunavik EU, which is the largest riding in Quebec. It represents 52% of the region. So I have non-Indigenous people in my riding, my own nation, Algonquin and Anishinaabe, and I have all of the northern Inuit villages in my riding as well.
And how has stepping into that role been for you? I know it was so recent. It was back in April or May this year. And how has that transition been like for you?
It's only been 4 months.
Yeah.
So, I was sworn in as a minister on the 13th of May. So I think, yeah, literally today, it's 4 months. It has felt like 4 years because there is so much to do. There's a lot of work, there's a lot of learning. Of course, as a former leader, I'm a former Grand Chief of my nation. I did have a relationship with the federal government. I knew what it felt like to sit on the other side of the table from the federal government. But now being the person who is working with community and working with Indigenous nations in Canada, there were a lot of things that I was not aware of, so I've had that glimpse behind the governmental veil, and I understand a lot of processes, and it's really helped me understand and reflect on what that relationship looks like. But it now also empowers me to know how I can improve that relationship. So I'm really happy to be the Minister of Indigenous Services. It was really, truly, truly an honor to be appointed by the Prime Minister. He has decided to have an Indigenous minister at Indigenous Services Canada, and I think that makes a really strong statement for this government.
And for listeners that are maybe it's their first time of hearing of Indigenous Services Canada and their first time hearing that it's the first time an Indigenous person has stepped into this role, could you speak a little bit to what Indigenous Services Canada is and what your role entails?
Sure. It's really important to me as a minister to, go into those media spaces that help people learn and understand what the federal government is doing for Canadians. And specifically for my role as the Minister of Indigenous Services, we call it ISK. So I'll call it ISK during the podcast. We are basically everything that Service Canada does for Canadians is what we do at ISK. We serve First Nations, Inuit, Métis people with everything from healthcare delivery to medical travel, education, infrastructure planning, governance. We support anything and everything that happens at the community level. We are the counterpart to Crown Indigenous Relations. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Rebecca Alty is in charge of the relationship between the Crown, the government, and the First Nation. So she takes on that part of the work. I'm really there for services. I am the minister that's responsible for helping your community have infrastructure. Water is a huge topic in this department, housing, economic development, everything and anything that touches your life in and outside of the community in some instances is my responsibility. I've chosen to come into these alternate to politic media spaces because I really want people to understand, the responsibility that we have. Very often, people are not really aware of what the government is doing, of what they're trying to bring forward. And I find that people really depend on mainstream media or the news to, know and understand what's happening at the government level. They have their interpretation of what they see. But for me, it's important that, First Nations feel like they can have a dialogue with the minister and ask those questions. So I'm really pleased that you accepted to have me in this conversation today.
I was literally just thinking of that when I asked you that question. I was like, being a younger Indigenous woman, I had no idea what was happening at the government. And you feel like sometimes those roles or those people are inaccessible and you have no way of connecting with them. So thank you for coming on this podcast and for saying yes to it. And I'm curious where your journey started. What made you want to be a leader in this way? Was that something you grew up kind of knowing? Was that something that was modeled to you by your parents? Where did your drive for Indigenous leadership come from?
My mother was raised by a single mother. My mom was married for a period of time, but for majority of my life, she was a single mother. She has always worked at the band office, always. I remember when I was about 7 or 8, she worked at the finance. Sometimes I'd go to the band office after work. She'd let me sit there and give me paper and a highlighter and act like I was working there. I think that's where it really started. Seeing somebody work in that government space on the community level really, really influenced me. It inspired me. My mom was really somebody that was in service. My mom has sadly passed, but she was somebody that exemplified the importance of making sure that when you do work, like you do good work for your nation, for your people. I have always, because of where she worked, because of my community is small, worked at the band office. You grow up, you know the chief, you know people that are on council, and I was always that kid that was like playing on the street, and I'd talk to people that I see and talk to the counselors in my community. And I think it just, for some reason, always like was interested in what they were doing. And I remember going to meetings with my grandparents when I was younger, going to the General Assembly, things like that. And I found like there was just so much energy, so much discussion going on there. So I chose to go in that path. My dream in life, my goals, I remember when I was really young, was to actually be a secretary at the band office. And I was at one point in my career, was I was the secretary at the band office, but then I became the assistant to the chief, and then I became the political attaché, and then on a fluke, my late mom told me, "I think you could be a leader. You should try to run." And, to honor her memory, I decided to run for deputy chief, thinking, I don't think people will support me to do this. My nation is a nation that operates in their language. So all of our majority of our council meetings were mostly in Cree, but our regional government level meetings are all in Cree.
Mm.
And I was able to be elected locally to work for my community. I guess they thought I did a good job. They asked me to run regionally. I became the deputy grand chief, and then I became the first female grand chief of my nation as well. So I've had the gift of language. I was not a fluent speaker. I lost some of my language when I was younger. When I left my office as a grand chief, I felt that my Cree language improved a lot. I consider myself a fluent speaker because I can carry a conversation. I could chair a meeting. I could have governmental discussions in my language. I'm really proud of that. I'm not somebody that's super fluent in traditional terminology. Like I can't describe how the snow is falling down the side of a hill. Well, maybe I could, but to a certain degree.
I love that. I thank you for sharing, and I can relate. My mom is also a single mom, and so she raised 3 of us on her own, and I think she really paved the way to also know what my values are when it comes to what I lead with. And I'm curious, 1, what does Indigenous leadership look like to you? And 2, what does the word matriarch mean to you?
When all of my career has been in Indigenous leadership up until this point, and it's
Mhm.
interesting because I am now in a non-Indigenous space. I am working for the Crown, but I am serving Indigenous people. When I had the call from the Prime Minister saying, he called me directly and he asked me, I would like to appoint you to be a minister, and he named Indigenous Services. I mean, I never expected to be a minister, full disclosure. I was just really happy if I I could make it to become an MP. But I had that conversation with my husband and said, what do you do if you get that call? What if you get this ministry? What if you get that ministry? When I reflected on, what if you get asked to be Indigenous services, there has been somebody that has been offered this role before and they chose to say no. And I respect that. That's their decision. But for me, I really asked myself, if you have the opportunity to go into this ministry and make the change that it truly needs to take those barriers away from Indigenous people, are you going to do it? And I thought, of course I am, because if I don't, when are we going to start doing that? I believe that Indigenous leadership, it requires you to have hard conversations.
Mm,
The topics are really challenging in the Indigenous political world. You're dealing with addiction, you're dealing with homelessness, housing crisis, historical underfunding. If you don't come to the table and have that conversation, it's going to be harder for you to see the change that you truly need for your
mm,
people. So I chose to say yes. It has been extremely challenging, but I also feel that First Nations people across the country have been so kind to me, have been
mm,
so helpful, have been so proud of me. And I'm sure even just that can be really challenging to be proud of somebody to be a minister that represents the Indian Act,
mhm,
which is harmful to our
mhm.
people. But for me to be able to remove the barriers that the Indian Act has in place, I have to take the challenge to get to the table and be the voice that represents First Nations.
Mhm. And I'm curious for your process. I am sure you're in a lot of challenging conversations and you are probably met with a lot of different emotions and a lot of different opinions. And so, what guides you to take action on something? Maybe what are those values that you stand by and you lead with integrity for?
I want to say first that I'm really proud to share this space with other Indigenous MPs.
Mhm.
We have another Indigenous female minister. There's an Indigenous Secretary of State. I'm really proud that we have that representation of who we are. We
Mhm.
represent like from coast to coast. That's
Mhm.
really, really important. Having those people to be able to go to debrief or to speak to
Mm.
something that I find challenging or look for that advice has really, really helped me a lot. In terms of, when you're coming to the table and you're representing the reality of what it means to be Indigenous, to grow up in community, the challenges that you face, I find there's a lot of teaching to be done. There
Mhm.
are some people that I've worked with that do not have any exposure to First Nations people. There are some
Mm.
that are great allies and come to our meetings and discuss solutions with us. And then, clearly there's some people in the House of Commons that it is not a priority for them. So you're meeting everybody that are in a different place in terms of
Mm.
their relationship with First Nations, with Inuit, with Métis people. But we have to be in those spaces. We have to
Mhm.
start occupying them and being visibly present because one of the things that's important to me as a matriarch is, I really want to not only blaze the trail, but I want to be sure that that trail has a really clear footpath for other people to follow. So
Mhm.
that's important. Whether you are a female, whether you're, you know, a young man or a young gentleman wanting to come into a role, or you're two-spirited or you're trans, it's really important that that Indigenous representation is there. And, I hope that people see that there are firsts that are coming into this space, but it also requires that there are seconds and thirds and that it becomes a norm that you
Mhm.
hear about an Indigenous minister.
Mm. I love that you brought up the other Indigenous folks that you work with and you're supported by. It makes it seem like the work isn't just yours alone to carry and it's supported through a network of people. And I think what we still have to work on as Indigenous people is supporting one another, even if there's difference opinion. There's so much more that we can learn from each other. And going back to that initial question, I assume your mom was one of the first matriarchs you were inspired by. You had mentioned her earlier. But in your own words, could you describe what the word matriarch even means to you?
Matriarch to me means somebody who is ambitious, who's gentle, who's fierce, who's strong, who's skilled, who is offering the opportunity to push women into a space that maybe they're not visibly in, and having the courage to do that. I think that's, for me, really the foundational part of how I would describe somebody that I view as a matriarch. It's really having that courage to go into those places because it is tough. Sometimes it is tough to be the only woman at the
Mhm.
table. Not even in those spaces where we're all indigenous and I was
Mhm.
the only female at the table. There is a difference. There's a difference between the roles that men and women carry. I'm not saying that, one is more important than the other, but they are complementary to each other. Who I am as a person has really flourished because of, the love that my husband has given me. And who my husband is as a man, I think has really been because of our relationship too,
Hmm.
and how he cares for our family. So I think they're complementary to one another. I'm not saying they're mandatory either, but there is something about having that support and that dynamic that for me, really shaped who I am.
Mm. I love that you bring in that concept of balance, and I think sometimes that's a misconception of what matriarchy is people just feel like it's patriarchy, but with an M, and it's women dominating these spaces, and I think that's the difference of how we view matriarchy as Indigenous people, and also knowing that there's difference of that meaning depending which nation you come from and which teachings you carry or you have been guided by. I'm curious if you see a space for matriarchal leadership to exist within your new role as the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada. Because for me, think of that maybe as not opposing, but I'm curious if you think there is a spot for that within the new roles that you are now holding.
Definitely, definitely. I see it in my colleagues,
Mm.
and even in my non-Indigenous colleagues, like we have a health minister that's female. Health is really holistic. And I
Mhm.
feel that Minister Michelle brings that to the table. Immediately she spoke to me about mental wellness, mental health, how it is critical part of being well. It's
Mhm.
like it takes a different view to kind of look at the holistic
Mm.
point of giving service to somebody, even for myself and my ministry. Like, I could maybe focus all on housing and put all of my energy to housing because yes, housing is a huge determinant to having a good quality of life, but you need everything. You need your
Mhm.
family to be in that house. You need water. You need access to school. You need to have a healthy community. You need those community supports. You need to take care of your elders. You need to be sure that it's a safe space for kids. So I think matriarchy in a leadership role does have a more global view, a holistic view. You're taking into consideration so many different components. I see that in my colleagues and how they're managing their files, how they're talking about their files. We sit in a cabinet, and there are many women. I think we're almost balanced. We're maybe off by one, but we are really, there's a lot of really strong women in cabinet. I'm very proud to know them and proud to work with them.
You speak often about the women that are carrying these roles and responsibilities, but now I'm curious on the opposite end. How can the government ensure and protect and continue to support and honor Indigenous women and girls and Two Spirit people? What does that look like through the government supporting Indigenous women?
That's a really tough question. That's a
Yeah.
really tough question. And, I'm going to speak to it honestly because it really bothers me as an
Hmm.
Indigenous woman to see on the news stories of, you know, families having to sift through a garbage dump to look for their loved ones.
Hmm.
And it bothers me even more when I saw provincial governments debating that as part of their attempt to be elected. Okay. That really bothers me that that's even a dialogue that this country has. That's not normal. It's not normal. I don't care whether you are Indigenous, whether you're non Indigenous, whether you are, a new Canadian. That is not normal. And I think that when you are asked that question, you have to be honest when you address it. That really bothered me. That bothered me because I'm a mother. I have daughters that age of the victims of crime, the victims that those families have I am so thankful to know that they have had their questions answered, but that's a reality for many communities across Canada. And I think as government, I will always be the voice that points to the fact that we cannot be we have to be sensitive to
Mhm.
at the end of the day, we have to show care and compassion for the people that we work for. And I will always be the voice at the table that speaks to, removing those views of segregation, thinking
Mm.
that this is, an Indian problem or it's the responsibility of the chief and council. It
Mm.
is everybody's responsibility to have respect for life at every level of government.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, and I feel like, I really respect what you said because it humanizes, like, what we're currently dealing with, and I think for me, personally, sometimes I just feel overwhelmed by it all, and so sometimes I just shut out the government completely, and I just don't listen because after how long, it makes me, question if we are moving in the right direction. And so maybe you could shine light, maybe about the policies that are in place or something that you're working on to ensure the health and the well being of Indigenous women and girls and Two Spirit people.
For me, when I'm looking at my department, I'm really looking like at a whole of government approach, first
Right.
of all. There's a lot, the work that we do at Indigenous Services Canada is to serve Indigenous people. That's our client. We are not the only ministry that has that responsibility. Every single ministry in the federal government has an obligation to serve because Indigenous people are in the military. They have businesses. They're part of industry. They are clients off reserve in healthcare. They are teachers. You really have to stop the segregation of how
Mm.
we view Indigenous people because we
Yeah.
are in all spaces. We are not just living in a remote, isolated community. We are in every single space. We have people that are figures of history in the Indigenous world. So we have
Hmm.
to really take that place. I am trying to make sure that, this is understood in this
Hmm.
government. This is something that we have to do. We have to shift towards that. I'm also really looking at what can I do to make sure that I'm removing those barriers. We have two streams of healthcare in Canada. It's not federal provincial. We have, you know, provincial federal relationships that offer healthcare, and then we have Indigenous healthcare. And to me, that represents a form of segregation,
Totally.
and it should not be segregation in Canada in 2025. I reached out to my colleagues and told them, look, we need to work together. We need to have these interministerial tables because I should be able to collaborate with you in offering that service. Yes,
Mm.
if you're in community, it is a specialization. We do have to be, aware that there's a cultural component to healing. There's a
Right.
language barrier when if you come from a community that you only have your language as a first language. So I am sensitive to that, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we're streamlining that service from when you step out the door of your house in the res to
Mm.
when you go to the big city to receive your appointment from the doctor.
Right.
We really have to do that.
Thank you for sharing that. Um, That brings me into my next question. What are some of the what do you hope for when it comes to Indigenous futurism? There's this concept of Indigenous futurism, and I feel like you are cultivating that right now through your role as a minister. You've been doing that throughout your career. And so now in your new role, I guess, what are you hoping to see? You've mentioned it a few times, less segregation, more matriarchal leadership. When you think of Indigenous futurism, when it comes to your role itself, what do you hope to see?
I'm hoping, and I'm going to speak to what I'm hoping to see in my clients, the people that I serve first. I'm hoping to see, youth that are growing up in community proud of who they are, proud of their identity, having their language, having the ability to hunt, having a relationship with their territory, having a respect and relationship with the environment that they grow up in, being able to share that knowledge, being very confident in who they are, going to school, going to post sec, taking advantage of going into the bush and living with your grandparents and learning a traditional way of life and really feeling empowered by that. And you go to your clinic and you are served by an Indigenous doctor or nurse, or you go to school and the teachers are Indigenous and the principal is Indigenous. And, every part of your life, there is that representation of Indigenous people. And I want to do what I can in the time that I minister because I don't know the length or the lifespan of this government. We're a minority government. Usually they say it's 18 to 24 months, but we never
Mm,
know. And I mean, you can call an election at any time. But I hope that I'm the person that's going to inject that first, boost of energy into a change cycle. And I hope that whoever follows after me and for the ones that continue to come and serve in this role, that Indigenous Services Canada works to do everything that they can to empower community to make that
mm,
a reality. Of what I
mm,
spoke to, that it's really community driven, that we are the ones that are shaping the space for our members to be happy and healthy. My ultimate desire and dream is to see the devolution of my department. I
mm,
think that the relationship that the Crown has with First Nations people is through, you know, the Indian Act. And this is an act that I believe needs to be undone. And in
mm,
that undoing process, it means empowering and strengthening our communities to take on the responsibility to be self determining, self governing, and having that care and compassion for their members. That is a really long-term objective.
mhm,
I don't think that's a 2-year process, but I also don't want it to be a 50-year process.
mhm. Yeah, and I think when you are, like, dreaming up those processes, it is almost like a dream because it hasn't been done before, but I love the lens that you look at it with is through empowerment while we are dismantling or, reconstructing. And for you specifically, I'm curious, is there a way to weave, who we are as Indigenous people, so whether it's through a wellness or a language or our culture, is there a way to weave that into policy?
Of course there is. It's it's written in the first line if you want it to be. When you're the minister, you write the policy according to the level of culture, to the level of identity that you want it to be. And it shouldn't only be because the minister is Indigenous, it should be because it's the norm. And I think
Totally.
for me, I'm in that space where I'm really trying to make it the norm.
Right. And for the younger Indigenous youth out there that are maybe being inspired by your journey and wanting to maybe one day be a member of parliament or even a minister, what's your advice for the younger generation of Indigenous youth?
I really was surprised when I came to government. There's two sides in the ministry. There's the department side where it's public service. You apply for these jobs, they're careers. But there's also the political side. And I have really great political staff that I work with. They're very young. Some of them we just hired somebody that was fresh out of university and I have Indigenous staff in my department. I'm really proud of that. It was really important to me to make sure I had Indigenous staff. But there's a lot of opportunity there. So if you are coming out of college or university and you're seeking, reach out to people and really, go on the federal government website and see if you would like to work. We have programs. There are leadership programs that are internship programs. You can learn a lot. There's internship opportunities all of the time. Some of my staff came to me from the Prime Minister's office. They were interns, they were working for the government. I There's not very many Indigenous staffers on Parliament Hill. I think there's probably less than a dozen. So if you are in Ottawa, if you are, in the surrounding Ottawa territory, if you want to come to Ottawa and take this internship, this is a path into federal
Mm,
government to being a staffer and volunteer, like join the Liberal Party, join the Green Party, join the NDP, join whatever party you think represents your values and start working for them and start learning because you can be a huge influence. A lot of the things that you speak to and that you bring forward, this is the space that ideas grow from. And
mhm.
there are not very many people that realize, volunteering in these spaces give you the opportunity to influence where government goes.
Totally, and I guess it's, like, expanding your network and, like, meeting people and putting yourself in new situations. Um, for me, I'm curious if there's any everyday practices or rituals that you have to anchor yourself when maybe, you have a lot on your to-do list or there's a lot going on. I'm curious more of, like, behind the scenes, what does your everyday, like, ritual to bring you back to yourself look like?
What do I have the time for is probably the first question because time is your most precious resource. Um, for me to kind of like, you know, to stay grounded in who I am and to continue to be Mandy because, yes, everybody in my work life calls me minister, but at the end of the day, I'm still a mom.
Yeah.
I connect with my kids. They all live in Gatineau. They're in school. I'm really proud to be a mom. They keep me humble. They will tell me
So
straight, like,
true.
"Mom, not here." But I really love animals. This whole podcast was with my dog Minnie, who
Aw.
is adorable. She's my anxiety therapy dog, so I spend a lot of time with her. I have 2 dogs. They're actually quite famous because we wrote, a book for my nation on bullying, and the story is about Minnie. She looks really different, that she gets bullied by other dogs. It's also written in Cree language, in English and in French. But it's really important to me to stay connected to those things that are part of who I am. I love my dogs, I love my family. I am, 6 p.m. sharp granny tea drinker. I love my green tea in the evening. Probably the two things that really keep me grounded in who I am. I do beadwork, so I'll pick up my needle and, really find that place in my beads to be able to create and express myself. And my husband is a hunter. I'm very happy that I met somebody who keeps me consistently served with moose meat and fish. So we will go to our camp and, decompress on our trap line.
Sounds like you live a very, like, holistically balanced life, and I love oh my god, your dog is so cute.
It was her birthday yesterday. So
Oh,
happy
it's her
birthday, Mindy.
birthday. A little Virgo puppy. Um, and I know September 30th is coming up, and you're probably getting a lot of questions and emails. But for non-Indigenous listeners, what are ways that they can actually support reconciliation that extends farther beyond just the 1 day a year that, they have off now? Because I am asked all the time, like, what are some everyday actions that I can take towards reconciliation?
Reconciliation is a journey, it's a process. I think there are different views on what reconciliation means. Very often, you will hear those conversations where people are saying, "This happened hundreds of years ago."
Yeah.
I've heard that statement of, "Why don't you just get over it?"
Mhm.
And I think we always have to do that educating of telling people, "How old are you?" The likelihood of you as an adult, if you were born Indigenous, you would be a residential school survivor.
Mhm.
It wasn't 100 years ago. So I always think that, you have to show compassion when you're educating people. It's a really
Mm.
hard conversation to have. Not everybody intends to make those kind of comments. Sometimes they come from a place of just not having the exposure or the knowledge. Being able to read the documents produced by the TRC, really, really important. No matter which field of employment you work in, you can help be the voice at the table. I know one of them, really has a lot of work to do with universities. If you are a
Mm.
staff of a university, to really go to your university head and ask, what are we doing to make this a space inclusive for Indigenous people? It's
Mm.
not only about being inclusive. It's about whatever field you work in, asking yourself, what is the Indigenous lens in this
Right.
space? That can be from healthcare to fashion to art to policymaking to public service to public safety. Asking yourself, what is the representation of First Nations people, Inuit people,
Mm.
Métis people? What can I do in my media campaigns to call attention to that? If you're a company that's recording a commercial,
Mhm.
asking yourself, should I not have an Indigenous woman representing this product? There's just a lot of really beautiful young Indigenous women that can be models and
Yes.
can represent. I think you have familiarity in that space. But men too, like really representing who we are as Canadians and making sure that you pay attention to that representation and awareness. I think
Mm,
that's a huge part of reconciliation. Anybody can do that any day of the year.
mhm. And I think, yeah, like you had mentioned at the beginning, like reconciliation looks different, I think, depending on the lens that you come from. Do you like the term reconciliation? Like when you think of the term reconciliation, like what do you think of when it comes to that term?
The evolution of reconciliation from where it started and where it is now, I think we are beginning to transition into a new space. I
Mhm.
have a lot of work and respect for everything that was done by the TRC to the Indigenous leadership that spoke to it. We've pointed a lot to what has happened. We've been very vocal about it. But I think for us to move into the next space and to really address the healing part of what reconciliation represents, I think there's more work to be done in this space. And
Mm,
I say that because I think there needs to be more concrete solutions in how we as First Nations people can do that internal work and reflecting of the traumas that we carry. And we all do, myself included. And, that part of the reconciliation is
mhm.
what I'm looking for as a minister, is I'm looking for those ideas. What can I do to contribute to that part where, you know, yes, we speak to the fact that things have happened to us, but I want to start speaking to the fact of how can I help you with your healing? How can I
Exactly.
help you to take those first steps? Because that's really hard. And it takes people to say, I'm ready to do that for myself. I could have
Mm,
every program in the world, but unless you are ready to say, I want to look and I want to see what I could do to be able to shed the weight,
mm,
of the trauma in my life or the things that I've endured begins with really you saying, I'm ready to do this. I want to do this. And I want to be the person that's there to help support you when you start
mm.
that journey.
Mm. I love that you kind of spin reconciliation because when I think of reconciliation, it's about that relationship initially. But from what I'm hearing from you, it's like first your relationship to yourself and understanding the relationship to yourself. My healing journey, I feel like, has been lifelong. And for me personally, I got to a point where I was tired of repeating the traumas that I had went through. I was tired of repeating the stories of the harm and the violence that happened to me and my family, and for me, I started trying to I dealt with my stuff, but then I started looking more towards the solutions, and I think that's, what I hope to see when it comes to even national truth and reconciliation is having a solution-focused approach, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and I know you've touched on a little bit of the programs, but I'm curious, what are the programs that you are focused on, as the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada when that relates to, supporting us as Indigenous people? Is there one certain program that you're really excited about? Yeah, I'm curious what those look like.
I feel like personally, I'm in a space where, there's programming that's in a really, really challenging space because
Mhm,
it has been pushed into a legal space. I am so concerned about children that are going into care. I'm concerned about the harms that happen to them. I'm concerned about the trauma that they feel from the insecurity, losing that confidence in who they are because, they're removed traumatically from their homes. That really concerns me. I'm a mom. I'm a mom of 4 kids. They're all adults, but I've seen what CFS does to children. I've seen kids that have been in the program grow up and come out of it, including in, my own extended family. I've really seen how harmful that is. And child family services and offering this service is a really challenging thing to do, but we have to get it right. We have to get it right. We can no longer let discussion and let decision making stall us finding a solution and a path forward for First Nations children. So I'm in a space where I have to respond to the tribunal that is taking decisions for First Nations children across the country. I really need community to come forward and work with me to find those solutions rapidly because we all have a responsibility to take care
mhm.
of kids, whether they are your nieces, your nephews, your grandkids. We have a responsibility. even in leadership at the council level, at the federal level, and the elders level, like everybody has a commitment to taking care of kids. They're our future. That also applies in another really challenging fall, which is Jordan's principle. You
Right.
know, this is probably one of the files that I think impacts me the most personally because I do have people that I really love and care for in my
Mhm.
family that have special needs that are impacted by that jurisdictional gap of living on community, off community,
Mhm.
of, you know, of having supposed to be provided a service and not getting it. And then there's a back and forth. And
Mm.
that's probably my hardest work as a minister is to make sure that I come up with a solution.
Mhm.
You know, one thing that I want to say is whoever in your audience is listening, if you're a decision maker, if you have somebody, if your aunt is on council, if your, dad is the chief or whatever, please have that conversation and ask them, what can we do at the community level to help the minister find that solution that we need to make sure that Jordan's principle is brought back into the space that it's supposed to be?
Mm.
Because it has been everything and anything, and I really want it to focus on what it's supposed to be, is taking care of those kids that fall in that jurisdictional gap. And, you know, I could sit in my office and I could write a new set of rules for what Jordan's principle is supposed to be, but that wouldn't work. And that's
Mm.
not what we should be doing as Indigenous people. I should be reaching out to community. I should be reaching out to families and asking them help me build that solution.
Mm.
But we have to do it in a timely way because
Mm.
these kids can't wait for us.
Mhm.
This is the work that I have to do in the next couple of months that I want to engage with community. I want to have those roundtables and those discussions. I do have some ideas. I hope people are open to work with me, but I'm only here for whatever the lifespan is of this government. And I hope that, leadership will take the initiative to find a solution
Mm.
with me. I really
Mm.
hope so because we don't know who the next government is. And I don't know if they're going to have the same vision and approach as me. I think it's a bit unique because I am Indigenous. I have grown up on the community. I understand the reality of what you're facing. I was that young mom taking a plane to have an ultrasound and having a baby when I was a teenager. Like, I do feel that I really probably understand more than anybody else in cabinet, with exception to my Indigenous colleagues, the reality of the barriers that you face when receiving care. So I really want to be the one who works with you to help you get into a safe space to find those solutions for these kids. That's critical for me.
Thank you for
Mhm.
sharing that and for bringing that to this conversation. I'm curious for people listening that are wanting to get involved. Is there a way for them to get involved? You mentioned roundtable discussions. I'm curious, like, should they reach out to their community? Like, what is a tangible way for them to support?
There is always so much power in being a member of the community. And
Mhm.
people don't realize, the accountability of your elected officials lays with you. There's no body out there, there's no judge out there that determines accountability. It's you. You used your vote, you decided to give trust to somebody to represent you, to take decisions for you. Make sure you help guide them down that path. So if you are interested, please write a letter
Mm.
to your chief and council, take meetings, ask questions, ask your youth elected officials, ask your council members, write to your local MP if you're out of community. Ask your MP to support solutions for these programs, especially if they are in the opposition. Put that pressure on them. I really want people to say, hey, you need to participate in this solution development process. It's not a time to come to the table and push and fight. We're all working here for the same thing. We're all here to take care of these kids. And that's really, really important.
I'm curious if there's one teaching or one word that is guiding the work that you're doing right now. When you think of everything that you are um, wanting and dreaming and fighting for, is there a Cree teaching or a word in your language that anchors you and brings you back to that mission?
Of course. And I can always quote the same thing. I will never forget it. One of the elders that really had a huge influence on me, I had the opportunity to work with him in my early 20s. He sadly passed, but his name was Robbie Matthew. He was from the community of Chesapeake. I always remember we had a discussion and he was speaking, was sharing many stories, and he shared a teaching. And what he said was, "Most which means always show love. Show love for what you do, show love for those people that you're working for, show love for yourself, show love for others." I think that's really powerful. I think that's really, really powerful. There's a lot of solutions that you can find in really looking through that aspect of Elinuktain Sachiwalan. And Sachiwalan can mean different things. It can mean showing love, it could mean giving security, being compassionate. But I think it really, love is the word that embodies all of the things that you're trying to do when you're showing Sachiwalan.
Thank you so much for that, and I love that you anchored that, teaching into this episode because I feel like the whole world could use a lot more love right now. For people listening that are wanting to follow you or support you, where can they find you?
You can go to my social media. We have a political Facebook, Mandy Gull-Masty MP. This is where you can see all the photos of my work. If you're interested in who I am as Mandy Gull, the normal civilian part of my life, and some of my ministerial work. All my social media is Mandy Gull-Masty or Mandying around on Instagram or Facebook, on Snapchat. I really want people to know that if you have questions about the government, if you have questions about ministerial stuff or programs or whatever, I will always try to answer you. I won't answer you in 2 minutes, getting your message, but I will answer you. So, especially on Snapchat, like, if you're a young person, add me on Snapchat, Mandy Gull-Masty. I will try to answer your questions very often. I try to really get back to people quickly. I love speaking to schools. If you are coming to Ottawa for a school trip, please come to Parliament. I'll take you on a tour of the Parliament, and you can see and learn and understand all of the different things that happen there. I've hosted, some groups have come from schools to meet me. I really believe that you have to have that connection to youth. Youth issues are really at the heart of who I am. I have a close relationship with many youth leaders, so I want to show that support to them and help, be a guide for them in their path forward. But yeah, try to reach out, and I will speak to you.
You heard it here. Add her on Snap. Thank you so much, Minister Mandy, for sharing a bit of your story, a little bit about your journey, and what you hope to see when it comes to our future as Indigenous people. It was great having you here, and I can't wait to continue to support you and follow you along your journey. Hi, hi.
Thank you, Miigwech.